The ANC has opted for a government of national unity, or at least they have opted to call all of the parties that have managed to secure seats in the National Assembly to discussions in order to try and form a government of national unity. Now, the party failed to get an outright majority following the recent general elections. Party president of the ANC, Cyril Ramaphosa, says that various parties that come together to form a government of national unity have to, of course, find common ground in order to serve South Africans and improve the economy. Now, last year, the government convened the National Dialogue on Coalition Governments to create a sort of framework on coalitions. Now, few political parties that attended the event signed up for that. Now, to weigh in and help us unpack the issues raised, we joined virtually by political analyst Asanda Ngoasheng. Asanda, good morning and welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning and thank you for having me.
So, of course, there were people who had already preempted that we may find ourselves in the position that we are right now. Hence, of course, the start of that dialogue. And the intention of the dialogue was, of course, to agree on a set of principles that will make coalitions work. So, again, perhaps worth revisiting the importance of having that framework in order to facilitate if we ultimately end up with a government of national unity.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is that this coalition dialogue came about because the DA was talking about a moonshot pact, and this moonshot pact basically had the potential of bringing together all the smaller opposition parties to be in a sort of anti-government or opposition bloc against the ANC, which might have been a majority or had just gotten, under 50%. And so it became very clear that if the DA was organizing this, then there needed to be a conversation about if South Africa suddenly found itself with all of these blocks, what would the most likely situation be, and how would this conundrum be solved? And so the national dialogue was then kind of put together with a framework which was effectively presented to the political parties. Now, various political parties made various submissions. And at the time, because of course you're dealing with a situation that is hypothetical, there are some agreements, but there are also a lot of disagreements. And so it's a framework, it's not a finite thing. And what's going to be happening now over the next kind of 7 days or so is that political parties are going to have to go back to that framework, are going to have to re-engage and say, we thought that perhaps this and that might work this way, but actually we've changed our minds. It's 2024 now, the voters have voted this way and given us this mandate. And for me, what was important and interesting is going back to our first attempt at the government of national unity in order to see how we did it and what the basic tenets of that were, as a way of kind of understanding what's likely to happen now, and also being able to do a comparative analysis and engage with what is different now compared to when we were in 1994.
Now, if we remember, that process hit a snag after some of the opposition parties walked out and they said that the process was not inclusive. So, seeing what's happening right now, again, a lot of toing and froing, the anger or the disgruntlement, the displeasure that was shown by the smaller parties, do you think that would continue to have an impact on the formation of a government of national unity now?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if we go back to 1994, because I thought it was interesting to see what happened in 1994 and what's happening now. So if you go back to 1994, one of the reasons for a government of national unity was a lack of trust and the fact that, there was this transition period that needed to be taken care of. In this instance, what we have is a political, I think a political South Africa, effectively, that voted to say, we don't want the ANC in government, but we still want them to have quite a large majority within the government framework. And then they also voted for political parties like the MK, the EFF, and the other smaller parties to have a share in this government. And that's the premise that we are coming from, that this is essentially on some level what the voters wanted in voting the way that they did. So differently to other times where they voted ANC in a clear majority. The smaller parties are in a position where, they feel like they have unique propositions, they feel like they have unique mandates, and these mandates are going to be important for them to be able to show the voter that they implemented them, because if they don't do that, then they simply won't get the votes the next time. So one of the issues, for instance, for a smaller-ish political party like the Patriotic Alliance is this issue of how we're going to deal with illegal immigration. You've already had Gayton McKenzie saying he wants the Minister of Home Affairs, and not only does he want the Minister of Home Affairs, he wants there to be a declaration of mass deportation of anybody who is in the country illegally. Now, this is going to be tricky because we've got a Home Affairs portfolio with, Dr. Motsoaledi, who was already in the process of overhauling the entire migration system of South Africa. And so the question then becomes, if you take that Home Affairs portfolio, you give it to a Gayton McKenzie, what happens to the administrative processes? What happens to the legal processes that have already taken place for this overhaul? And the second question then becomes, will a Gayton McKenzie follow the letter of the law in terms of the new migration policies and actually have the patience to see the formal structures, the bills and everything that needs to be in place before you can act on these new policies? Or will he simply implement what he wants to do, which is arrive in office and, and tell everybody who is not in the country legally to go home? And these are some of the issues that we are going to have to deal with. But this is not a new thing, right? This is exactly what happened in 1994 as well, where various smaller parties were constantly threatening to leave the negotiation table. And in fact, it was interesting for me when I was doing the research to go back and find out that the IFP only agreed 8 days before the finalization of the Government of National Unity to join. And upon joining, already demanding a portfolio. And that's how, the late Buthelezi managed to become the Home Affairs Minister, because that was kind of a compromise position that he was given as a late joiner of a Government of National Unity, which had almost been fully constituted by the time the IFP agreed. We have now an MK which is reluctant to join, which has stated that they're not interested in these conversations that are happening, but might actually do an about turn as the IFP did and actually want to participate and start demanding a ministerial position. It's interesting for me to see that we almost have like a repeat of history, almost in a way that is kind of weird, because, you had political parties saying 2024 is our 1994, and they didn't know what they were actually predicting or what they were actually calling, because we really are in a 1994 situation. But the main difference this time is that the ANC has governance experience, which it didn't have at that time. And having gone through that first Government of National Unity, they actually have experience that will help them to be able to decide. And also they managed to ensure that every single government since 1994 had at least one minister who wasn't a member of the ANC. So in some respects, they have always had some version of a Government of National Unity that required, negotiation, engagement with somebody who wasn't of their political party. So this experience won't be new for ANC people, but it might be new for other people who haven't had governance before, including the DA, who hasn't had a similar structure and hasn't had to co-govern with somebody who is not a member of their political party in their cabinet.
And of course, so many questions that are being asked, but again, helpful for everybody to come to the negotiation table with demands. How is that likely to impact the ultimate decisions? Because it makes life very difficult for the African National Congress, who's reaching out to everybody, but everybody's coming with a set of demands, and I suppose some more palatable than others.
Well, I think the two biggest threats right now, the first biggest threat is if all political parties outside of the ANC come together and form what's called a minority government, wherein they automatically make the ANC the biggest opposition party in the country and co-govern together. The second possibility is if there are the coalition government rather than a government of national unity, and in these structures, the MK and the EFF decide to stay out of it and use their percentages to come together and effectively become the biggest opposition party, displacing the Democratic Alliance, because that is going to bring new dynamics and may lead to either a kind of hung parliament wherein the EFF and the MK block any and everything coming out of whatever coalition there is, or they might use their position as the official opposition to kind of convince other political parties to implement some of their policies in a way that's not possible under a government of national unity. And of course, you know, the one positive that could happen is that we could really get this government of national unity and people could potentially work together. But as you've highlighted, the one who's going to have to do a lot of thinking and compromise is the ANC, because ultimately they are the ones that have to decide what they will and won't accept. And that is based on, you know, whether these things are aligned with the democratic principles of South Africa, but also their own ideologies and principles as a political party. Because, for instance, they can't just accept a DA that says, destroy minimum wage, because that is a key tenet in ANC policy. Or another political party coming and saying no more social grants in South Africa. They can't accept that because that is a key tenet of ANC policy. Or even someone saying kill BE and affirmative action, because again, that is a key tenet of ANC policy. So the ANC still has a lot of power in this process. You know, I said to someone the other day, they are effectively the bride, and they're in a process of deciding who of the suitors they will marry based on what principles and values the suitors have. And in fact, they actually have the power to even decide, will there even be a marriage? But there's always a possibility that the suitors could all pull out and the ANC could find itself as a bride with no husband and no one willing to actually go into a marriage with it. That's the simplest way of putting it. And if that was to happen, South Africa is the one that's going to be in trouble. So it's in the best interest of all South African political parties to come together and find a solution for this one, because it is what is best for this country that they all come together, that they figure out a way to work together so that we can have the kind of country that all the diverse and different people of South Africa can be proud of and can engage in. We've done it in 1994. We've done it pre-1994, I suppose, and we can do it again in 2024, I believe.
All right, that's where we're going to have to leave it. And of course, these talks are ongoing. But thanks so much to Asanda Ngoasheng, political analyst, looking back at the national dialogue on coalition governments that was held last year, and of course, where we find ourselves right now.